picture this. You're standing in a city that is just completely hemmed in.
Right.
Like on one side, you're looking at this massive, 2,000-foot wall of flat-topped sandstone just rising straight up into the sky.
It's a total geographical monolith.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And then on the other side, you've got not just one, but two distinct oceans crashing against the coastline.
Yeah, the landscape there is so insistent, it's undeniably present.
It literally becomes the organizing fact of your every single day. I mean, the mountain and the sea, they decide where you eat, where you walk, where you watch the sun go down.
It's definitely not just a backdrop.
No, it's the main character.
Yeah.
And it forces you to reconsider how a city even functions,
Absolutely. You really can't ignore geography when it's built on that kind of scale. I mean, it isolates neighborhoods, it redirects weather patterns.
It fundamentally alters the daily rhythm of anyone living there.
Yes, exactly.
So that is exactly the dynamic we're unpacking today. We're taking you on a deep dive into Cape Town, South Africa.
And our mission here is simple. We want to give you a shortcut to becoming fully informed about this incredibly complex place.
Right, because we aren't here to just read off a glossy travel brochure.
No, definitely not.
We want to dismantle the anatomy of this city, understand the mechanics of its extraordinary geography, and really explore a culture that is famously resilient.
And to do that, we are drawing from a really highly detailed source.
Yeah, the updated 2026 edition of The Ultimate Cape Town Travel Guide by Yvonne Jr. Blanchett of Aeria Voyages.
Which is just a comprehensive look at the realities of the city. I mean, both the stunning highs and, well, the foundational grit.
Right. And before we get into the streets and the mountains, we need to set a ground rule for this deep dive.
An important one, yeah.
Because our source material makes it abundantly clear that you cannot understand Cape Town by only looking at the beautiful scenery.
No, you really can't. Grasping this city requires confronting its heavy history.
Right. We are talking about centuries of colonialism, the brutal realities of slavery, and the systemic machinery of apartheid.
And we're going to cover all of that today.
Yes, we are. We are going to impartially report the historical timeline exactly as the text presents it. Because, well, those historical realities are the absolute foundation of the modern identity you'd be walking through today.
And what's fascinating here is how the text frames Cape Town as a masterclass in contrasts.
A masterclass in friction, almost.
Exactly. You have this brutal, heavy history of division, and it's sitting right on top of a globally recognized hotspot of natural biodiversity.
Right on the exact same footprint.
Right. And the friction between those extremes and the ultimate synthesis of them is what actually generates that unmatched creative energy you see in the city right now.
So let's start with the physical footprint because, you mentioned the geography, isolating neighborhood.
Yeah, the mountain dictates everything.
Right. Let's talk about the geographic dictator in the room. Table Mountain.
2,000 feet of flat-topped sandstone.
Sitting right in the middle of everything. And the guide says you can get up there via a 12-minute cable car ride or, if you really want to punish your legs.
Oh, yeah, the Platteklip Gorge hike.
Right, a 2-hour hike up Platteklip Gorge. And the author notes that this mountain dictates the weather, the light, and the daily lives of the residents.
It really does.
I kept thinking of it like a giant mood ring for the city, like with the clouds constantly rolling over it and changing the vibe of the streets below.
That's a great way to put it.
But honestly, a lot of cities have mountains nearby. I mean, Denver has the Rockies. Seattle has Rainier.
Right.
What makes Table Mountain so mechanically different for a visitor?
Well, the distinction is really the proximity and the placement.
Like,
this isn't just some mountain in the distance that you look at on the horizon. It is a mountain that you are physically wrapped around.
Oh, because it's right in the center.
Exactly. It sits directly in the center of the peninsula. And because of its sheer vertical size and the way it intercepts coastal winds, it physically blocks weather systems.
Wait, it literally blocks the weather?
Yeah. That is how it creates distinct microclimates.
Oh, wow.
You can have a situation where a gale force wind and driving rain are just hammering one side of the mountain.
Right.
And then a neighborhood just 2 miles away on the leeward side is experiencing completely still, sunny weather.
So it's literally a weather shield for half the city.
Depending on which way the wind is blowing, yeah.
That's wild.
But the geology of the mountain does something even more interesting.
Okay, what's that?
So the sandstone is incredibly ancient, and the soil it produces is famously nutrient poor.
Which you'd think means nothing can grow there, right?
Exactly. But it actually forced an evolutionary marvel. The summit and the surrounding slopes are covered in this uniquely diverse shrubland. It's called fynbos.
Fynbos. Yeah, I saw that term in the text. It's part of the Cape Floristic region, right?
Right.
But what makes it so special if the soil is terrible?
Well, the lack of nutrients is actually what drove the diversity.
Really?
Yeah.
How does that work?
Because no single plant could dominate and monopolize all the resources.
Mm-hmm.
So thousands of different species evolved these highly specialized ways to survive in tiny, isolated pockets.
Oh, so they all just adapted to their own little micro niches?
Exactly. And fynbos is found nowhere else on Earth.
Wow.
The Cape Peninsula alone, just this one specific finger of land extending south of the city, it contains more plant species than the entire British Isles.
Wait, hold on. Let me just process the math on that.
It's a lot.
You are saying there are more unique plant species on this single peninsula than in the entirety of the United Kingdom?
Yes. The biodiversity per square kilometer is just staggering.
That's unbelievable.
So, when you take that cable car up to the summit, you aren't just getting an observation deck to look at the urban sprawl.
Right.
You are stepping into an ecological zone that is completely unique on the planet. It's full of proteas, ericas, and restios that have engineered entirely unique ways to survive.
That completely reframes the entire mountain. I mean, it's not just a rock. It's a floating botanical garden.
Pretty much, yeah.
And that ancient, specialized land is the foundation for the people who have lived there too. The text explains that this area has been continuously inhabited for thousands of years.
By the Khoikhoi and San peoples, right?
Yeah, those are the foundational indigenous populations.
And they had an incredibly deep, sustainable relationship with this exact ecosystem. The Khoikhoi were traditionally pastoralists, herding cattle.
Right. And the San were hunter-gatherers.
Exactly. But the timeline pivots aggressively in 1652.
1652.
Yeah.
That is when the Dutch East India Company arrives.
Yeah, and they established a provisioning station, which actually marked the first permanent European settlement in sub-Saharan Africa.
But why Cape Town, though? Was it just because of the natural harbor?
Well, the natural harbor was key, sure, but it was purely a logistical calculation.
Oh, okay.
The Dutch were heavily involved in the spice route, right? Sailing from Europe to Indonesia.
Which took months.
Exactly. And crews were being absolutely decimated by scurvy.
The vitamin C deficiency.
Right. So they desperately needed a midway point to grow fresh vegetables and restock ships.
Wow.
Yeah, the very center of Cape Town today still has a public park called the Company's Garden.
Let me guess. It was a garden for the ships.
It originally started as a literal cabbage patch to cure scurvy for passing sailors.
That is just wild to think about. The geopolitical history of this city basically started as a maritime grocery store.
Essentially, yes.
But from that point in 1652, the timeline presented in the text outlines a trajectory that's fundamentally shaped by colonial expansion.
Yes, the Dutch brought in enslaved people to build the colony.
And then the British took over in the 1800s.
Right. And eventually, this long history of racial segregation culminated in the full legal machinery of apartheid in the 20th century.
And the author really emphasizes that the city's modern infrastructure and its museums honestly confront this history.
They do. They detail the actions of the apartheid government from the 1960s until its dismantling in 1991.
Right, and they deeply examine the legacy of Nelson Mandela, too.
Yeah, who spent 18 of his 27 years in prison just offshore.
On Robben Island.
Exactly.
And the text presents this all as factual context that just cannot be separated from any genuine understanding of the place.
No, it can't.
You aren't just walking through a pretty coastal town. You're walking through a society that has endured an incredibly turbulent history.
And a society that is actively in the process of defining its future.
Right. And if we look at the mechanics of the modern city, that history of struggle and the coming together of diverse populations, it's the direct fuel for what you experience today.
Absolutely. The artistic explosion, the culinary renaissance, none of that exists in a vacuum.
It's generated by this specific mix of cultures forced into this specific geographic bowl.
Exactly.
So let's talk about that bowl. Because the mountain divides the land so dramatically, Cape Town is not laid out on a single, simple grid.
No, you can't just walk in a straight line from one end to the other.
It is a collection of fiercely distinct neighborhoods spread across a wide geography. So let's map out where you should actually spend your time.
Okay, let's start with the area literally called the City Bowl.
Right. the city bowl. It's curled right beneath the north face of Table Mountain, right?
Yeah, it essentially forms a natural amphitheater facing the harbor,
And this includes the Central Business District, or the CBD.
where Long Street acts as the main artery for nightlife.
But tucked into the slopes right above the CBD are two highly distinct historical neighborhoods.
The Waterkant and the Bo-Kaap.
Right. Now, Waterkant is described as having these restored Victorian cobbled lanes.
Very picturesque.
But the Bo-Kaap is visually arresting. It's famous for these steep streets lined with houses painted in electric, almost neon colors.
Yeah, cobalt, chartreuse, salmon, rose.
It is easily one of the most photographed spots in South Africa.
Oh, without a doubt.
But I want to pause here, okay? Let's unpack this, because it's so easy for tourists to treat a place like the Bo-Kaap as just an Instagram backdrop, take a selfie, and leave.
That is a very real pitfall. And the source material is adamant that the Bo-Kaap is a living, breathing community with a profound history.
It's the historic home of Cape Town's Muslim community, right?
Yes. The residents here are descendants of the enslaved people brought over by the Dutch.
From Malaysia, Indonesia, India, and East Africa.
Exactly, back in the 17th and 18th centuries.
And there is a specific historical reason for those bright colors, right? I mean, they didn't just paint them that way for aesthetics.
No, they didn't. While the exact origins are debated, a widely accepted historical narrative is that during the colonial and apartheid eras, the residents were heavily restricted.
Okay.
The houses were often leased, and rule dictated that all the houses had to be painted white.
Just flat white.
Right. So when those oppressive property laws were finally lifted and residents were allowed to actually buy their homes.
They painted them?
Yes, painting them in these vivid, distinct colors was an expression of freedom.
Wow.
It was a massive visual rejection of uniformity, a true celebration of identity.
That completely changes how you look at a photograph of those streets. I mean, it's not a design choice. It's a declaration of independence in pigment.
Perfectly said.
And that community has its own faith tradition, its own mosques, and a completely unique cuisine that we are absolutely going to get into later.
Definitely.
But moving slightly out of the historical center, we hit what the text calls the creative engines of Cape Town.
Ah, Woodstock and Salt River.
Yeah. And this area has undergone a massive structural shift, hasn't it?
It really has. Woodstock and Salt River used to be the industrial heartland of the city.
Like textile mills, factories, heavy machinery.
Exactly. And over the past decade, as that industry moved out, you were left with these cavernous, abandoned brick spaces.
And nature abhors a vacuum, especially when artists need cheap rent.
Exactly. The shift from heavy industry to creative hub is a classic urban evolution.
Right, you see it everywhere.
But in Cape Town, it happened with incredible speed and intensity.
And the anchor of this transformation is a complex called the Old Biscuit Mill.
Yeah, they took a massive derelict factory and turned it into a nexus for chefs, designers, and entrepreneurs.
So if you want to see contemporary South African design, bespoke coffee roasters, and world-class street art, this is where you go.
It is the real pulse of modern Cape Town, completely removed from the typical tourist foot traffic of the historic docks.
Okay, so we have the historical heart, we have the creative engine, and now we have to look at the coast.
The Atlantic Seaboard.
Right. The text traces an arc from the city bowl over to the Atlantic Seaboard. This stretch runs from Sea Point down to Camps Bay.
And the defining feature here is the ocean, obviously.
Right. But specifically the fact that the water is startlingly, painfully cold.
Oh, yes. It is a geographical paradox for a lot of visitors.
That's so.
Well, the weather outside might be 90 degrees Fahrenheit. The sun is beating down on these glamorous white sand beaches.
And then?
The moment you step into the water, it feels like ice.
But why is that? I mean, if they're the tip of Africa, why isn't it warm tropical water?
It all comes down to ocean currents, specifically the Benguela current.
The Benguela current.
Yes. This current flows directly up the west coast of Africa from Antarctica.
Oh, so it's literally Antarctic water.
Exactly. But it's not just that the water originated in the south. It's a process called upwelling.
Upwelling.
What does that mean? The prevailing coastal winds blow the surface water away from the shore,
Okay.
which pulls deep, freezing, nutrient-dense water up from the bottom of the ocean to replace it.
Oh, wow.
So that water off Camps Bay is quite literally fresh from the deep ocean floor.
That sounds miserable for swimming.
It's definitely an acquired taste.
But the text says the culture along this coast is magnificent despite the freezing water.
Oh, absolutely.
You've got Camps Bay, which is framed by the 12 Apostles mountain range, and sounds like it's built entirely around the spectacle of the sunset.
It's very glamorous.
But then you have Sea Point, and the author points to Sea Point as the most genuinely local of these coastal neighborhoods.
Yeah, it's densely populated with high-rise apartments. It's incredibly diverse.
And it features this massive paved promenade right along the ocean.
The Sea Point Promenade, it's vital to the city's social fabric.
Because the water is too cold for casual swimming, the beach culture shifts onto the pavement.
Exactly.
I kept picturing Sea Point as the city's communal living room and treadmill combined.
That's spot on.
Like it's where everyone goes for their morning run, to walk their dogs, or to just grab an ice cream and stroll as the sun goes down.
It's a public space where all the different demographics of the city physically intersect.
Which is incredibly important in a city with a history of spatial segregation, right?
Oh, absolutely. Public spaces like the promenade serve as equalizers.
So we have this mental map now. The city bowl tucked into the mountain, the creative hum of Woodstock, and the open air of the Atlantic Seaboard.
Right.
Now, how does a visitor actually move through this? Because the daily activities recommended here swing wildly from profound political weight to absolute unfiltered joy.
They do, and you have to mentally prepare for that whiplash.
Yeah.
Because the deepest historical experience you can have in Cape Town is unquestionably the visit to Robben Island.
Right. It's a UNESCO World Heritage Site.
Yeah.
Located just 3 miles off the V&A waterfront.
You take a 40-minute ferry crossing to get there.
And 3 miles is so close. I mean, it's basically the distance of a typical suburban commute.
And that proximity is actually one of the most psychologically brutal aspects of the prison's history.
Really? Why?
When Nelson Mandela and other political prisoners were held there, they were forced to work in the limestone quarry.
Huh?
And from the island, on a clear day, they had a perfect, unobstructed view of Table Mountain and the city of Cape Town.
Oh, wow.
They could see the lights of the city turning on at night. They could see normal life carrying on just across the bay.
And it was completely out of reach.
Exactly. It was a
Yeah.
constant visual reminder of what had been taken from them.
That is chilling, to be that close to your home and completely exiled from it.
Yeah.
But the detail about how you experience the island today is what really struck me. I mean, you don't just walk through empty cells with an audio guide.
No, you don't. The decision of how to present this history was handled with incredible intentionality.
Yeah.
The tours on the island are actually led by former political prisoners.
I just cannot imagine a more powerful way to interact with history.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, it gives the experience an emotional weight and a level of oral history that no plaque on a wall could ever replicate.
Right, because you were standing in the exact maximum security block where the anti-apartheid leaders were held.
And the person explaining the daily routine, the censorship of letters, the psychological toll, is someone who actually lived it.
It bridges the gap between historical fact and human reality.
It really does.
The logistics of this trip are tricky, though, right?
Very. The text explicitly warns that you have to book this tour weeks in advance.
Because the ferries sell out constantly.
And because you are crossing open ocean in that freezing Bengola current, access is entirely at the mercy of the weather.
Oh, right. So if there are heavy swells, the crossing gets canceled.
Exactly. So it requires a very flexible itinerary.
Okay, so once you return from the profound gravity of Robben Island, the city offers a complete pivot into the natural extremes of the region.
A total shift. Yeah.
The primary recommendation is renting a car and taking the Cape Peninsula Drive.
Which is absolutely stunning.
Oh, this drive sounds unbelievable. You trace the thin, rocky finger of land that stretches south from the city.
Right down the coast.
And you hit Chapman's Peak Drive, which the text describes as having vertiginous cliffs.
Yeah, vertiginous is the right word.
I was looking into how they even built this road.
Hmm.
They literally had to blast a ledge into the sheer rock face that drops hundreds of feet straight down into the Atlantic.
It's an engineering marvel.
And you follow this all the way down to Cape Point, which just feels like the edge of the world.
But the stop that you really can't miss is Boulders Beach.
Yes, down in the naval village of Simonstown.
Exactly.
Because right there, nestled among these massive ancient granite boulders, is a colony of 3,000 African penguins.
Just living their lives.
And how did they even get there? I mean, penguins belong in Antarctica, right?
Well, that goes right back to the Benguela Current we discussed.
Oh, really?
Yeah. Because that freezing, nutrient-dense water is constantly being pulled up from the deep, it supports massive schools of pilchards and anchovies.
Ah, so the food is there.
Exactly. The water provides the food source, and the massive granite boulders on the beach provide protection from the wind and predators.
Okay, that makes sense.
So this colony just established itself on the mainland in the 1980s and thrived.
And the detail I love most is that the text notes these penguins treat human visitors with, quote, complete indifference.
They really do.
You're walking on these raised wooden boardwalks, and there are thousands of birds waddling around, nesting, arguing with each other.
And they could not care less that you were standing 3 feet away.
It's this bizarre, joyful collision of wild nature and human infrastructure.
It perfectly captures the biodiversity of the Cape. I mean, you are an hour's drive from a major, sophisticated urban center, and you're casually observing a thriving penguin colony in its natural habitat.
But the contrasts don't stop with the natural world.
No, they don't.
Because the city has recently engineered some massive human-made marvels, too. Specifically, the Zeitz MOCAA.
Ah, the Museum of Contemporary Art Africa.
Yeah, which is the largest museum of contemporary African art in the world.
And honestly, the building itself is arguably the most significant piece of art in the collection.
Right, it's located at the V&A Waterfront.
And the architectural challenge here was immense. It was designed by the British architect Thomas Heatherwick.
And the site was an abandoned, monumental grain silo complex, right?
Basically 42 tightly packed, massive, vertical concrete tubes.
Wait, how do you turn solid concrete tubes into a museum?
It was not easy.
Because if you hollow out load-bearing silos, wouldn't the entire structure just collapse on itself?
That was the exact engineering nightmare they faced. They couldn't just knock down the walls.
So what did they do?
Heatherwick's team essentially poured a completely new layer of reinforced concrete inside the existing tubes to stabilize them.
Oh, like a sleeve.
Exactly. Once the new inner sleeves were set, they used heavy machinery to slice through the original concrete,
Wow.
carving out a massive cathedral-like atrium right through the center of the building.
That is mind-bending.
And get this, the shape of the atrium was actually mapped from the shape of a single magnified grain of corn.
No way. So they essentially sculpted a negative space out of a solid block of industrial concrete based on a grain of corn.
Yes, it is a total triumph of adaptive reuse.
And to add a layer of extreme luxury to it, the text notes that the Silo Hotel sits in the converted grain elevator tower right above the museum.
Yes, with those incredible windows.
Right. It features these pillowed geometric glass windows that bulge outward.
It's stunning.
So you literally have the pinnacle of global luxury hospitality sitting physically on top of the pinnacle of contemporary African art.
It's quite a statement.
From cutting-edge architectural marvels, we transition back to ancient botanical ones.
Kirstenbosch.
Right. The text heavily emphasizes the Kirstenbosch National Botanical Garden.
Established in 1913.
Right on the eastern slopes of Table Mountain. And they have something called the Boomslang Canopy Walkway.
Right. The boomslang, which is the African's word for a tree snake, is a suspended curving bridge.
Okay.
And it takes you up out of the undergrowth and snakes right through the tree canopy.
It sounds like the perfect way to actually see the biodiversity we were talking about earlier.
It really is.
And if you go between November and April, on a Sunday evening, they host summer concerts on the lawn.
Oh, those are amazing.
You could just bring a picnic and sit under the shadow of the mountain.
Which perfectly encapsulates the Cape Town lifestyle, you know. It's not a city where you just observe nature from behind glass. It is an outdoor culture. You interact with the environment constantly.
Now, I don't know about you, but all of this hiking, navigating freezing oceans, and exploring concrete cathedrals sounds exhausting.
In the best way possible, though.
In the best way possible, yes. And it definitely works up an appetite. Which brings us to the food.
The food scene is incredible.
Yeah, the author of our source makes a very bold claim here. He states that Cape Town's food scene is not merely the best in Africa, but one of the most dynamic and exciting in the entire world.
And he traces the mechanics of that culinary scene directly back to the historical timeline we laid out at the beginning.
Right.
The food here is a literal edible map of the global trade routes.
So let's start with Cape Malay cuisine, which is highlighted as one of South Africa's great foundational culinary traditions.
It's a must-try.
The flagship dish to try is called bobotie. And the text recommends getting it at an institution in the Bo-Kaap called Pismiela.
Yes.
But when I read the description of bobotie, I had to stop.
Oh, really? Why?
Because it is described as spiced, minced meat, baked with an egg custard topping, and flavored with dried fruit and curry.
It's unique, definitely.
Let me get this straight. Savory spiced meat, sweet dried fruit, and a layer of baked egg custard on top.
That's the recipe.
That sounds like 3 completely different meals stacked on top of each other. How does that flavor profile actually work without clashing?
Well, on paper, it sounds chaotic, I'll give you that.
Right.
But chemically and historically, it is brilliant. Think back to the Dutch East India Company and the enslaved people brought from Malaysia and Indonesia.
Okay.
They brought their spice traditions: turmeric, coriander, cumin, tamarind.
Right, all those warm spices.
But they didn't have their traditional meats, so they applied those eastern spices to the local Cape lamb and beef.
Oh, interesting.
Then they incorporated dried fruit, which was a really common preservation method for the Dutch ships.
Okay, so you have the deep, earthy heat of the Indian Ocean spices interacting with the sweetness of the fruit.
Exactly.
But what about the egg custard? That's the part that throws me.
The egg custard is a European technique. It's similar to what you might see in a Greek moussaka, actually.
Okay.
The genius of it is how it functions on the palate. The spices provide heat and complexity, the fruit provides sweet acidity, and the rich, dairy-based egg custard provides a smooth, neutralizing texture that perfectly balances the heat.
It coats the tongue.
Exactly. The text calls it the national dish of South Africa for a reason. It is the literal blending of African ingredients, Asian spices, and European technique.
That makes so much sense. It's not a contradiction, it's a synthesis.
You are eating the history of the 17th century spice trade.
But the food scene isn't just historical. Cape Town has gained massive global recognition in the contemporary fine dining space as well.
Oh, absolutely.
The text points to places like the Test Kitchen in Woodstock and La Colombe, which is set high up on a wine estate in Constantia.
And the defining trend driving these high-end restaurants is a hyper-local focus executed with international precision.
Hyper-local focus.
Yes. You have a generation of chefs who trained globally in Michelin-starred kitchens, returning to Cape Town and realizing the ingredients in their backyard are just unmatched.
What kind of local ingredients are we talking about?
Well, they are utilizing things like Karoo lamb.
Karoo lamb.
The Karoo is a vast semi-desert region inland from Cape Town, and the sheep there graze on fragrant wild scrub bushes.
Oh, so what does that do to the meat?
It means the meat is naturally pre-seasoned with these herbaceous rosemary-like flavors before it even hits the kitchen.
Wow, that's amazing.
And they're pairing that with lionfish pulled straight from the cold Benguela current and foraging for coastal succulents.
So they're applying world-class technical skill
Mm-hmm.
to ingredients you can only find in this specific biome.
Exactly.
That sounds incredible. And for those who don't want a 12-course tasting menu, the text highly recommends the Neighbor Goods Market at the Old Biscuit Mill on Saturday mornings.
It's such a great spot.
It sounds like the weekly social center for the city's creative class, just packed with artisan breads, local cheeses, and street food.
And all of this culinary richness, the long lunches, the Saturday markets, it ties into a broader philosophy that the author really pushes throughout the material.
The slow travel philosophy.
Yes, the concept of slow travel.
I love this part. The author provides a suggested 3-day itinerary hitting the major landmarks, but he heavily stresses that the itinerary is just a suggestion.
A loose guide, really.
He insists that Cape Town is a city that actively punishes you if you rush.
It really does.
He advises building in time for nothing in particular, promising that if you leave empty gaps in your schedule, the city will generously fill them.
It's crucial advice. The instinct for modern travelers is to optimize every single hour, right?
To rush from the mountain to the museum to the beach.
Exactly. But the real pleasure of Cape Town is environmental. It's watching the light change on the sandstone cliffs, or taking a 2-hour lunch at a vineyard, or just feeling the ocean wind on the promenade.
You miss the entire essence of the city if you treat it like a checklist.
You really do.
And timing your visit is a big part of that. Cape Town has a Mediterranean climate. Hot, dry summers, and mild, wet winters.
Right?
The text states the absolute best time to visit is autumn, specifically from March to May.
Because the intense summer heat softens, those infamous gale force winds drop, and most importantly, it's the time of the wine harvest.
Which serves as the perfect pivot to explore the regions surrounding the city.
Yes, because Cape Town is not just an isolated destination, it's a launch pad.
The text strongly recommends renting a car, because once you cross the city limits, the options are world-class.
Let's start with the winelands. You don't even have to drive far.
No, the Constantia Valley is literally a 15-minute drive from the city center.
It's so close.
And this is the oldest wine-producing area in the Southern Hemisphere, with origins dating back to the 17th century.
Right. The text specifically highlights estates like Group Constantia and Klein Constantia.
And there is a historical detail here that just blew my mind.
About Napoleon.
Yes. Klein Constantia produces a natural sweet wine called Vin de Constance. And And it was reportedly the favorite wine of Napoleon Bonaparte while he was in exile on St. Helena.
That's a crazy fact.
He literally requested it on his deathbed.
It is a remarkable historical footnote, but, the sheer quality of the wine in this region is no accident.
Oh.
We talked about the Mediterranean climate and the ancient geology of Table Mountain. When you combine those, you get world-class terroir.
Okay, but how does the terroir actually affect the wine chemically?
It's all about stress and climate control.
Stress.
Yeah, so the sandstone-derived soils drain water very quickly, which forces the vines to push their roots deep into the earth to survive.
Oh, I see.
This stress means the vines produce fewer grapes, but the grapes they do produce are highly concentrated in flavor.
Oh, okay.
Then you factor in the coastal wind. The locals call it the Cape Doctor.
The Cape Doctor.
Yeah, this cold wind blows through the vineyards, cooling the grapes down under the hot African sun, which preserves their natural acidity and prevents rot. It's the perfect physical mechanism for growing complex, balanced wine.
And if you are willing to drive just an hour east, you hit the larger wine regions of Stellenbosch and Franschhoek.
Franschhoek is gorgeous.
It is described as the gastronomic capital of South Africa, set in a deep valley, surrounded by towering mountains and centuries-old estates, producing incredible vintages and olive oils.
But wine is just the start. The natural phenomena just a short drive away are staggering.
Right. It depends heavily on the season, though.
It does. But the wildlife excursions outside the city are extraordinary.
Like if you visit between June and November, the text recommends driving about an hour and a half southeast to a town called Hermanus.
For the whales?
Yes, for the whales.
Southern right whales migrate up from the Antarctic and enter Walker Bay specifically to calve and nurse their young in the protected water.
And because the bay drops off deeply right near the cliffs, the whales come incredibly close to the shore.
Yeah, Hermanus is recognized globally as one of the best land-based whale-watching destinations on Earth. You don't even need a boat.
And the detail about Hermanus that is just so charming to me is the whale crier.
Oh, I love that part.
The town employs a person who walks the cliff paths, scanning the ocean. When they spot a whale, they blow a horn to alert everyone.
But it's not just any horn.
Right, it's not a brass bugle, it's a horn made out of dried kelp.
Bull kelp, specifically, grows in the cold coastal waters there. The thick stems are hollow, and when dried, they have incredible acoustic properties.
It's a perfect example of utilizing the local ecosystem.
It really is.
And if you happen to be visiting in August or September, the text points you north to the West Coast National Park for a completely different biological event.
The wildflower bloom.
Yes. For those two specific months, the arid, dry scrubland of the West Coast undergoes a massive transformation.
It's stunning.
The author describes it as a carpet of color that stretches all the way to the horizon. Millions of Namaqualand daisies and Cape annuals just exploding out of the dry dirt.
It's hard to even picture until you see it.
But how does an entire region just spontaneously bloom all at once?
Well, it's a survival mechanism.
It's okay.
The seeds lie dormant in the dry, nutrient-poor soil for most of the year, protected from the heat.
Right.
But when the specific winter rainfalls hit, combined with the warming spring temperatures in August, it triggers a mass germination.
Oh, wow.
The plants have to grow, bloom, and reproduce in an incredibly short window before the summer heat returns and bakes the earth again.
So the pace of life in that ecosystem is frantic,
Very much so.
which is such a contrast to the slow travel philosophy of the city we were just talking about.
A total contrast, yeah.
The text also notes that for travelers with more time, driving the Garden Route, a multi-day coastal highway heading east, is a must.
Highly recommended.
And it points perfectly with a broader South African itinerary, specifically a safari in Kruger National Park on the other side of the country.
Yeah, you get the ultimate contrast between the urban sophistication, the fine dining of the Cape, and the wild, unfiltered bushveld of a safari.
It is the ultimate multi-destination trip.
It is. But whether you are staying in the city or exploring the country, the text is extremely clear that you have to navigate the modern realities of South Africa.
Right.
You cannot be a passive traveler here.
No, and this brings us to the logistics of actually existing in the city.
This is crucial.
Because this isn't just standard travel advice about packing an umbrella. The author details some very specific, localized realities.
Right, starting with load shedding.
Yeah. Load shedding.
It's a term you have to know.
Load shedding is the term for the national power utilities system of scheduled rolling blackouts.
It is basically a demand management tool.
Okay.
When the national grid doesn't have enough capacity to meet the country's electricity needs, they purposefully cut power to different neighborhoods on a rotating schedule to prevent the entire national grid from collapsing.
As a visitor from Europe or North America, your first thought is absolute panic. Like, what do you mean the power just turns off for 2 hours?
It sounds alarming, sure, but the text explains the mechanics of why this is happening.
Why is it happening?
It's an infrastructural crisis. South Africa relies heavily on a fleet of massive, aging coal-fired power plants.
Okay.
And due to historical lack of maintenance, structural issues, and delays in bringing new capacity online, these plants frequently break down.
So the supply simply cannot meet the demand.
Exactly.
But here's where it gets really interesting. What fascinated me is how this city has completely adapted to this.
Oh, the adaptation is incredible.
The text frames it not as a catastrophic emergency for tourists, but just as a daily reality that requires minor adaptation.
Right, because most hotels, restaurants, and major tourist spots have massive backup generators or solar inverter systems.
Right, so as a visitor sitting in a restaurant, the lights might flicker for a second, you hear a generator kick on, and your dinner continues uninterrupted.
The private sector has essentially insulated the tourist experience from the worst of the grid failures.
But it does affect public infrastructure, right?
Yes, most notably the traffic lights.
And here is where the social contract of the city really kicks in. The author advises that when the traffic lights are completely dead, drivers universally treat the intersection as a four-way stop.
It's a seamless, unspoken agreement.
You also need to keep your phone charged. And the text says downloading an app called Eskom Push is absolutely essential.
Oh, you need that app.
It gives you real-time, neighborhood-by-neighborhood schedules of the power outages.
And that app is a perfect microcosm of Cape Town's resilience, really.
How so?
It was built by a couple of local software developers out of pure frustration, and it became a vital national utility tool used by millions.
Wow.
It shows a tech-forward society finding workarounds for institutional failures.
The text also addresses safety in transport. It notes that Cape Town requires a higher level of situational awareness than most European cities.
Yes, you have to be smart.
The advice is highly practical. Use Uber at night instead of walking. Don't flash expensive cameras in crowded areas. And ask your hotel concierge for advice on specific streets, as the safety of an area can change drastically from one block to the next.
Exactly.
But it assures the reader that if you exercise common sense, the rewards of the city far outweigh the precautions.
I definitely do. And there's one final piece of practical advice that touches directly on the socioeconomic reality of the country.
Right.
It's regarding how you handle tipping.
This raises an important question, actually, because the text states that a 10 to 15% tip at restaurants is standard and expected.
That's normal, yeah.
But it highlights another interaction. Tipping 5 to 10 South African rand to informal parking attendants on the street or petrol station attendants who pump your gas and clean your windshield.
Right. And to put that in perspective, 5 to 10 rand is the equivalent of a few U.S. cents or a fraction of a euro.
Right. To a tourist, it's literally loose change.
But the author describes this act of tipping as a meaningful economic act.
Why is that micro-interaction so heavily emphasized?
Well, it goes back to the wealth inequality we touched on earlier.
Okay.
In a society that is still actively rebuilding itself from a legacy of systemic disenfranchisement, unemployment is a stark reality.
Right.
The informal economy people creating jobs for themselves by watching your car while you eat at a restaurant is a vital survival mechanism.
Ah, I see.
By tipping that attendant, you are directly participating in the microeconomy. It's a reminder that your presence as a tourist has a direct daily impact on the ground-level survival of the local population.
It requires you to travel with empathy.
Exactly.
It's a powerful reminder that you aren't just an observer. You are a participant in the ecosystem.
Absolutely.
We have covered massive ground today.
We really have.
We started at the wind-battered top of a 2,000-foot sandstone mountain, and we worked our way down through the microclimates of the city, defined by brilliant, vivid contrasts.
We looked impartially at a heavy timeline marked by colonialism and the machinery of apartheid.
And we saw how the friction of that painful past has synthesized into an incredibly vibrant, creative present.
We navigated the mechanics of neighborhoods, from the historic, brightly painted defiance of the Bo-Kaap to the industrial rebirth of Woodstock.
We explored the oceanic anomalies that bring penguins to Boulders Beach and the deep psychological weight of looking back at the city from Robben Island.
We unpacked the chemical genius of a globally recognized food scene built on centuries of spice trade history.
And explored the agricultural perfection of the winelands and the botanical explosion of the West Coast.
The source material proves definitively that Cape Town is not a passive experience.
No, it is a deeply textured, historically rich, and culinarily brilliant destination that demands a mindful, slow-paced visit.
And if you want to move beyond the surface-level tourist traps, the guide's author, Yvonne Jr. Blanchette at Air Aria Voyages, helps clients build custom itineraries designed to interact with the realities of the city.
And you can reach out to him to plan that journey.
It is a place that rewards those who take the time to understand the mechanisms beneath the beauty.
It really does. And as we wrap up this deep dive, I want to leave you with one final thought to mull over on your own.
Oh, okay.
Consider the fynbos vegetation we talked about earlier. That incredibly diverse plant ecosystem clinging to the nutrient-poor sandstone of the mountain.
Right, the fynbos.
In nature, many fynbos species rely on a brutal mechanism to survive. They actually require the destructive, searing heat of periodic sweeping wildfire to literally crack open their tough seed coats.
Wait, really?
Yes. Without the fire, the seeds remain dormant and the plant cannot regenerate. Only after the devastation of the flames can the seeds finally take root and bloom.
Wow.
Looking at Cape Town's incredibly turbulent history, the deep, destructive fires of its past, and the brilliant creative resurgence we see in its art, its food, and its people today. Is it possible that the city itself is a human reflection of the fynbos? That its extraordinary modern beauty and resilience could only have bloomed from the fires of its past?